All right, guys. So you're going to have to go ahead and brace yourself because we unfortunately are going to have to sit through a Kamala Harris clip. Okay, so she recently sat down with Katie Couric, who actually did a pretty decent job at not allowing her to completely dodge the question. And the main question, the crux of this clip, is how do you justify giving unquestioned, no strings attached support and weapons to Israel, as Benjamin Netanyahu is openly defying basically all of the major positions that Joe Biden is pretending to stand for. The main one they focus on here is on the prospects of a two-state solution, which Biden says is what he supports, and Netanyahu says, no way we're ever going to let that happen, right? So let's see how she kind of like flounders around here in this interview and tries to tiptoe around it until at the very end she finally admits they're not going to do anything to pressure Israel. So let's go ahead and jump into this.
Must do more to protect innocent civilians. We've been very clear, humanitarian aid must flow. From day one, I will tell you, one of my areas of priority included, let's think about the day after, because we must stay focused on an eventual two-state solution.
Well, having said that, I want to tell you something which I'm sure you're well aware of, that Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, recently said. He rejected U.S. calls to scale back Israel's military action in the Gaza Strip or to support a Palestinian state after the war. He even said that Israel, quote, must have security control over the entire territory west of the Jordan River, which includes Gaza. So given those positions, how can you possibly come together? How can the U.S. and Israel come together to solve this?
I mean, especially deeply ironic that after all of this hyperbolic freakout over college campus protesters saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, saying, oh, they're all genocidal, they want to wipe out the Jews, right? When what those protesters mean is we want freedom, dignity, full democratic and civil rights for everybody living in the region, right? But then when Netanyahu gets up there, he's able to go out and basically say a different phrasing of the same exact thing in an actually genocidal way, saying, I want full Israeli control from the west of the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. It's the same fucking phrase, except when he means it, he doesn't mean full democratic and civil rights for Israelis and Palestinians. He means endless occupation, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. That's what he actually means. And so it's just been incredibly frustrating seeing the complete hypocrisy when he says that versus when some college protesters say that, right? But let's see how she handles this.
And should aid to Israel be conditional?
So I'll start with the principles that we are applying to this discussion, which we've been very clear with the Israeli government about. One, as it relates to the day after, there should be no reoccupation of Gaza. There should be no changing of the territorial boundaries of Gaza. That the Palestinians are entitled to, in equal measure with Israelis, security and prosperity.
Doesn't sound like Bibi Netanyahu agrees with that.
We're the United States of America. I'm telling you our position. And we take our role in this discussion very seriously. There may be disagreements. That doesn't mean we're going to change our mind about the principles that are important to be applied to this process in terms of what a day after should look like. And those principles remain consistent. We believe very strongly, I believe very strongly, Palestinians are entitled to dignity and self-determination. We believe there must be a two-state solution for the sake of the stability in the region. We believe very strongly, as a first principle, Israel must be secure, that Hamas and must not be in a position to commit terrorist acts against innocent people or the people of Israel in particular.
So should aid, Madam Vice President, be conditional? If the Prime Minister of Israel is stating this, should that aid not come if there's not that kind of flexibility that you're seeking?
We are right now in a position of negotiating with Congress to follow through on a commitment we made for aid. And we are taking it one day at a time in terms of what is happening in the region and how we are addressing the issue. But that's where we are right now.
So I don't feel like you really answered my question.
I think I did.
Well, do you think it should be conditional? I know you're carrying out.
That's not our position right now.
Not right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So there you go. I mean, that's it. That's all that this comes down to. she can go out there and try to wax poetic about, well, we deeply care about the dignity of Palestinian people. We want there to be a two-state solution. We're doing all of this for the stability of the region. I mean, all of that is like comical at face value, right? The stability of the region, in the region. We have never been closer, okay, in recent years to a massive war sparking off in the Middle East, whether it's Israel and Hezbollah, which Israel has been warning that they are likely to get into a war with Hezbollah in maybe even the coming days or weeks, with the Yemeni Houthis that Biden has decided to go out and bomb Yemen instead of trying to push for a ceasefire in Israel as they do their attacks inside of the Red Sea. We've bombed not only Yemen, but also Iraq and Syria. We just had 3 U.S. troops who were killed in a base inside of Jordan as a result of all of this. We have U.S. politicians trying to drag us into war with Iran directly. I mean, stability in the Middle East. Your policy that you and Joe Biden are implementing right now is the exact precise opposite of what would deliver stability in the peace. You are actively destabilizing this region right now. So that part of it, deeply ironic. Also, the dignity of Palestinians. I mean, seriously, is this what we're doing right now? You're giving the weapons to the country and giving full diplomatic cover for, full political support for, the country that is dropping the bombs on their head. The country that has destroyed a literal majority of the standing structures, the buildings in the northern portion of Gaza, that attacks hospitals and schools and UN shelters and refugee camps on a damn near daily basis. The country that is actively starving the people of Gaza right now. And you have the audacity to then even follow it up and say, well, we as a core principle believe in, making sure there is a flow of humanitarian aid. A flow of humanitarian aid. I mean, take it from Netanyahu himself here. Just from a couple weeks ago, we're allowing minimum amount of aid necessary in order to prevent a Gaza humanitarian crisis. Well, I hate to break it to Bibi, but it's no longer even just a humanitarian crisis. It is the worst humanitarian crisis on the face of the planet. I just saw recent statistics from the United Nations just a couple of days ago. 570,000 people out of a population of only like 2 million people inside of Gaza. So 25% of the population in Gaza is currently categorized as the worst section, the worst categorization of starvation, to the point where it's now a famine inside of Gaza. 570,000 people at risk of immediate famine. Okay? And this is what he's coming out here saying. We need to do the minimum necessary, right? Well, you're doing well below the minimum, to say the least. And we've seen other stories as well, like this that I've been tracking over the last couple of days. And I might do a video on this tomorrow to break down some of the things that these protesters were saying and other government officials were saying about this, because it's absolutely batshit insane, the justifications that they're giving. Literally things like, we need to prevent these trucks that have flour in them from going into Gaza because the evil, Gazans are going to turn the flour and mix it with fertilizer and blow up things. I mean, it's just like absolutely insane shit. But I mean, Israeli protesters have been holding up a lot of these aid trucks. It's nowhere even remotely close to enough that's getting into Gaza right now. Okay, you've had not only these protesters, but the Israeli government, the Israeli military, that, I mean, these trucks take weeks and weeks and weeks to get through to Gaza, if they are even capable of getting through. Israel is blocking any trucks. They go through, they unload the entirety of the truck. If they find one thing that they arbitrarily take issue with, whether it's a tent pole or feminine hygiene kits or medical supplies, whatever they just don't like that's in the truck, they take it all out, and then they say, you got to restart this entire process again. If they find one thing in the truck that they personally object to. So, I mean, when you're blocking like 70% of the aid that's intended for Gaza, hard to believe that you're even providing the minimum, as Netanyahu was saying there. 570,000 people on the brink of an absolute famine. And you're talking about, well, we believe in the flow of humanitarian aid. The flow of humanitarian aid, is that why your administration just cut off funding to the UNRWA, the main agency that is responsible for facilitating aid getting to the people of Gaza? I mean, this just happened a couple of days ago. And you're talking about, we believe in the flow of humanitarian aid. Not only are you supporting Israel as they're blocking adequate aid from getting in, not only are you supporting Israel in creating the humanitarian crisis on the ground, but you are actually directly, making yourself complicit in this genocidal campaign by directly cutting off aid. And what was this based on? It was based on some unknown Shin Bet Israeli intelligence accusation against 12 out of thousands and thousands and thousands of UNRWA employees that they had some abstract participation maybe in October 7th, and you decide to punish not only the entire agency that's made up of like 13,000 different Palestinians for this unproven allegation, but you punish by extension 2 million people in Gaza that could very well die as a result of this lack of aid. So, I mean, fuck off with the notion that you care about the people of Gaza and their dignity. And there's nothing less dignified than scenes like this. I mean, children having to go and bring these tin cans or buckets or whatever they can fit in their hand. Looks like a fucking old butter can here, right? To go and try to desperately cling on to any scraps of food that they can find, drinking unsafe drinking water, if there is any that they can find. I mean, I've told you guys all of the different stories of the suffering of the children in Gaza. 10 children a day, losing limbs, many of them, having to have amputations without anesthetic because Israel won't allow in enough medical supplies. And you're sitting there talking about how, these are your priorities. And on a two-state solution, it could not have been clearer, right? Netanyahu again, I mean, this is just from a couple weeks ago, Netanyahu again rejects Palestinian sovereignty amid a fresh U.S. push for a two-state solution. And again, he used that phrase, full Israeli control to the west of the Jordan River, right? So he's firmly against a two-state solution. And this isn't a surprise. He didn't just come to this opinion. How do I know that? Well, because Benjamin Netanyahu himself praised Hamas and helped to keep Hamas in power for years and years and years, along with other right-wing, Israeli politicians, specifically because they viewed Hamas as a wedge between the Palestinian people, right? Gazans are ruled by Hamas in Gaza, and Palestinians in the West Bank are ruled under the Palestinian Authority. We keep them separate. We keep them divided. We can use Hamas as a tool to the international community to say, look at how evil they are. We could never have the possibility of a two-state solution with them. You used Hamas as a tool for yourself, for your own political agenda, and for an agenda that was explicitly to try to prevent any sort of establishment of a two-state solution. Beyond that, he's also been one of the most aggressive Israeli politicians in history in terms of expanding the completely illegal Israeli settlements inside of West Bank territory, where you're fragmenting Palestinians into a million different enclaves, making it completely impossible to even dream of having a contiguous Palestinian state. I mean, in order at this point to even just have a Palestinian state in the West Bank, you would have to, forcefully expel hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers that are on Palestinian land right now. Does anybody think that he's going to support that happening? No, of course not. A two-state solution is like this fantasy that liberals and conservatives even sometimes, hold in front of people's faces to give themselves some sort of plausible deniability at the reality of what is clearly an ethnic cleansing. If you don't like the word genocide in Gaza, well, it's an ethnic cleansing, a slow-rolling ethnic cleansing in the West Bank as well. I mean, how else do you refer to this set of policies other than that? And in terms of we don't support any loss of territory in Gaza, a couple of different things on that here. Israel demolishes buildings to create a buffer zone within Gaza, right? I mean, first off, if you wanted to create a buffer zone because you're scared of Gaza or something, you could do that in Israeli territory, right? You could do it on the outside of the Gaza Strip if you wanted to create a buffer zone. But no, they're creating a buffer zone and just demolishing civilian infrastructure within a 0.5 mile, 0.6 mile radius of the entirety of the Gaza Strip. And this is what resulted in that story of 20 some odd IDF troops dying because they were in a civilian house, a civilian neighborhood, rigging explosives, and then some Hamas guy fired an RPG at a tank, and it set off this series of a chain of explosives from the ones that they had just laid down, killing all of these IDF soldiers. So not only are you obviously killing Palestinians, but also getting your own guys killed with this kind of a land grab. Completely contrary to everything that Kamala Harris was saying there. And then we also had this. Israeli ministers joined gathering calling for the resettlement of Gaza. So you had guys like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. They say the conference, which was organized by the right-wing Nahala organization on Sunday night and dubbed Settlement Brings Security and Victory, called for new Jewish settlements to be built in Palestinian territories. The call of the politicians and activists gathering in occupied East Jerusalem came amid international pressure on Israel to confirm that it would respect Palestinian statehood after the war. They're not going to. Okay, hate to break it to people. Israel's Channel 12 reported that 12 ministers from Netanyahu's Likud party attended the conference. His far-right coalition partners, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, reiterated calls for Palestinians to be removed from Gaza. What do you think that means? These aren't just some random Israeli citizens. These guys are in his government. This is the Minister of National Security here, the finance minister. that are openly saying we need to completely ethnically cleanse the people of Gaza and then resettle our settlements there, right? And so you get maps like this that were shown at this big meeting here. I mean, here's Itamar Ben-Gvir dancing at the conference. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ, man. I mean, laying it all out here, right? All of these different places, the rubble, the death, the destruction, the carnage that they have, waged against the Palestinian people here. And they're just like, yeah, we're just going to go build on top of it and just forget that they were there. I mean, this is shit that openly happens. This was a massive conference that just happened with members of the government. With members of the government. This isn't normal, guys. This isn't normal. And yet, we don't hear about things like this. It's just brushed away. Oh, there's just some guys who are talking about it, Even though this is closer to tracking with what Israel is actually doing on the ground than any talk of a two-state solution. This is much closer to the reality of the trajectory that we are currently on. But the Biden administration, they're just in utter denial. And obviously, again, as they point out here, not just resettling Gaza would be completely illegal, a massive war crime of unprecedented proportions, but also, again, the West Bank settlements, completely illegal under international law. Human rights groups and many governments frequently condemned armed settler violence or terrorism against Palestinians. And again, it's destroyed the possibility of trying to get a two-state solution and have it legitimately be on the table. And, more on this, we had, some leaders within the Israeli settlement movement here. This guy, Yishai Fleischer, posting pictures of the IDF. I mean, marching through Gaza. I've seen tons of pictures and videos like this, waving Israeli flags. Sometimes they plant them in the ground in the rubble of the houses where human beings used to live here, Palestinians. And they plant their flags in the rubble, and a lot of IDF soldiers will post their TikToks, and they'll be like, I'm going to build a house here one day. I saw one IDF girl who posted a picture of herself on the beach, and she said, oh, it's a beautiful beach. I'm going to come back here once we've conquered this territory, and I'm going to come back in a bikini and take a picture of myself here. I mean, it's not just like some members of the government, it's also the IDF. A lot of these guys think, I'm going to live here one day. I want to create, Israeli settlements in this region. And then I'm going to link this down below. I don't want to read the entirety of it here to you guys, but Bernie Sanders wrote an op-ed. I thought it was kind of decent. He laid out a lot of the facts in terms of the current catastrophic humanitarian situation on the ground of, 80% of the population has been displaced, how many have been killed, 70% of whom are women and children, water scarcity, food scarcity, a lack of clean drinking water, the increased spread of disease, the 570,000 people facing catastrophic hunger that is equivalent to famine, no basic necessities, people in overcrowded conditions down in Rafah at the near the border with Egypt. And this was one I hadn't heard before. 10% of the population now has acute respiratory infections. So Kamala Harris, when she comes out here and she spouts off about how, there needs to be a reduction in civilian death, and we believe in dignity and a two-state solution and more humanitarian aid and all of this and that, no reduction in the size of Gaza. This is utterly detached from reality. The reality here is that everything she just said is the opposite of what Israel is doing. And the United States government is not only the most powerful and influential government in the entire face of the planet, okay, but we are also the greatest ally to Israel. We prop up their military. Without the United States, without your administration entirely supporting this, giving them diplomatic cover at the United Nations and vetoing resolutions and calling the ICJ case, finding it's plausible that they're committing a genocide, calling that completely meritless. All of this, cutting off UNRWA funding, the aid getting to Gaza, cutting it at their request. All of these things, the weapon shipments, everything, that adds up. If, as Kamala says at the end there, that there's not going to be any strings attached whatsoever, that adds up to you bending over for whatever the fuck Benjamin Netanyahu wants to do. There's no other two ways about it. You can have all the conversations behind the scenes and finger wag at them and bring things up, concerns, or whatever the fuck. You can say your opinion, but if you're not willing to actually use the levers of power that you have at your disposal, namely cutting off aid to Israel immediately, then this is all pointless virtue signaling at the end of the day. And that's exactly what this is. And the Biden administration thinks that people are going to forget about this. They think that people are going to, ignore everything that's happened come 2024. People are not forgetting about this. This is a stain, that is not only going to affect your odds of re-election, it's a stain that will last for the rest of your goddamn life. And I support all the people who have been going out and protesting in whatever capacity that they possibly can. People like Kamala Harris need to be confronted. They need to be uncomfortable. Okay? or we're just going to continue on this trajectory where they keep giving in to Benjamin Netanyahu's demands, and eventually we're going to end up with, the worst incarnation of whatever Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich's, genocidal wet dream is.